Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple minutes before starting the webinar as attendees are still joining. But I did want to point out that we do have our Gatekeeper knowledge base, which is a great tool for whether you're a new gatekeeper just starting out or an experienced gatekeeper looking to get the most out of the platform. You can always access it via your Gatekeeper account. There is the Help Center button where you can also directly search for any questions or articles that you have. James, Daniel, anything new on your end that you'd like to point out before we get started?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. Because this is quite an exciting one from the product update side. So we've recently, I think this was back in March, we had our first set, updated our best practice workflow templates library, which is handy that I'm mentioning that in today's session because we're about to dive into workflows. But we've recently updated it with a new template specifically for ESG assessments for vendors. I know that's a growing trend in the due diligence and supplier management world. So it's one that we're excited to have launched just a couple of weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago it went into production. So if you do have the desire to start assessing your vendors for environmental, social governance, then yeah, there's a process that's ready built in your Gatekeeper environments along with a walkthrough guide of how to get it configured. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a good workflow to have for sure. And yeah, just Lucy, on my side, I know I talk about this, I think every month we put these webinars on, but we do have a podcast called Procurement Reimagined. And this week's episode that just went out, actually it went out a week ago, is a compilation episode. So we've had about 10 guests on, and we put about 7 or 8 of them into a single episode just to showcase some of their top thoughts or some interesting thoughts that they had. So it's a really good episode. This one's a bit longer. It's about 45 minutes long. So if you do want to check it out, maybe go for a run, go for a walk and put it on 2x speed. And yeah, hopefully you'll get some good value out of that.
And make sure to subscribe if you aren't already.
Yeah, fine. Well, thanks for including that part. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's get started. It seems like we have quite a few attendees joining us already. So hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Chu. I'm the Learning Experience Lead here at Gatekeeper. And for today's webinar, I'm joined by James Ince, our Learning Experience Designer, and Daniel Barnes, our Community Manager. And to kick things off, before we get started into the webinar, I wanted to quickly review our Gatekeeper 3 pillars: our Restore Visibility, Take Control, and Safeguard Compliance. Now, for those of you who have joined us in our previous webinars, you'll be quite familiar with these 3 pillars. But if you're new, this stairway approach is how we at Gatekeeper really encourage everyone to follow in order to enable effective vendor and contract lifecycle management. So in our previous webinars, we've completed the Restore Visibility series, where we focus on where your data is stored and how people can view it as well as use it. And today's webinar kicks off the Take Control portion, where we're focusing on our workflows. And this is where you'll be able to see how creating digital processes will really benefit your company. And overall, these will form the foundations of our safeguard compliance, where it's based on our third-party risk management. And you'll be able to automate your vendor compliance, identify and track any of your risks, and move from a more reactive to a proactive way of working with risk management. Now, for today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on the fundamentals of workflows. And you'll be learning some of the benefits of digitization and automating your business processes, and learning more about the key components of a Gatekeeper workflow, which includes Kanban boards, phases, forms, as well as tasks. And we'll be going over some use cases. We're not planning to show any configuration, but still feel free to ask any questions that you have using the Q&A button, as well as the chat in Zoom, and we'll be able to answer any questions throughout the webinar, as well as we have some time at the very end, specifically dedicated for questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lucy. I was just going to say, like, questions are always good. Like James loves questions as well. I just want to point that out to anyone. James is such a nerd when it comes to these workflows that just ask as many questions as you want and we will try and get through them. or if we can't in this session, we can build them into our future sessions, because we'll probably be on this control series for a little while. But just for now, I just want to gauge your knowledge of workflows. So Lucy, I think we've got a poll that we're going to run now. Awesome, thank you. Hopefully everyone can see that. We'll just leave this up for about 30 seconds to a minute, not too long. I can see we've got a fair few people in, so we might just give it a little bit more time. And yeah, like to Lucy's point, like we're not really going to dive into the admin in this session. We're just kind of try and give you like a really clear overview of like, how do our workflows work? How do they operate? How we can get value out of them? And then like we can go into loads of detail in subsequent sessions around various little parts of it. And James, like I said, is a pro at workflows. He pretty much taught me, I'd say, James, you probably taught me everything I know on workflows initially.
I don't know, there might have been quite a lot of self-learning on the go.
On the knowledge base. Oh yeah. So actually, that's a good point. Lucy called it out at the start. I devoured the knowledge base when I first picked up Gatekeeper. I think I read the entire thing within like half a day just to learn it. But that's
very fast reading.
a little bit odd. Like yeah. I like to have a read for sure. Awesome.
Yeah. Let me end this poll. And yeah, check out our results here.
Yeah, so we've got it's actually more mixed than usual. We normally have a lot of beginners on here, and we've got still a contingent of little to no knowledge, some understanding. So I think this session is going to be perfect for the majority of people here, and even people who are familiar or even workflow admins will hopefully pick up a thing or two for sure. And yeah, especially to those admins, if you have any questions, please ask throughout.
Perfect. Thanks, Daniel. So Daniel, why would you say the digitization of business processes is so important to our gatekeepers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually thinking about this a bit today, because I know we were talking about this a little bit yesterday. But in short, like I think the major benefit is like bringing everything into one place. And James will kind of cover this in a moment, I think, as well. But most procurement contracts, legal people will typically have a whole suite that they kind of work through, whether it's email, Slack, project management systems. It might be Trello, Asana, something like that. A lot of people just have email and Word. A lot of people I still talk to every day are still doing things with paper documents, scanning documents, and all sorts. And when you're working like that, it's really hard to know what's going on at any one moment within your vendor or contract base. And as soon as you digitalize, effectively all your processes are in one place. Everyone that needs to use those processes has to come to that one place to do so, and it gives you control over that end-to-end process. So that's really the big takeaway for me. There's a lot of other benefits, right? Like time saved. If you set it up correctly, if you don't just transpose a manual process into a digital platform, you can save a lot of time, get a lot of good data. You can restore visibility very quickly because your data flows are good, and you can help I would say you could really automate a lot of the compliance side of things. I imagine some of the people on this call have probably dealt with like ISO audits, SOC audits, where they've had to like chase through, like go through loads of emails, go through SharePoint to find proof of stuff. When you've got Gatekeeper, it's kind of all there in one place. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, Lucy, because I will talk for days about this otherwise.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So James, can you tell us a little bit more about the benefits of using Gatekeeper for workflow automation?
Well, yeah, and I could talk for days about this bit as well, but I really like that first bit that Daniel mentioned. Whilst he was talking it through, I was like internally going, yeah, that's bang on. But the first bit you mentioned around having a centralized product that, you know, manages your processes really crosses these first two pillars we've actually got on the screen, both from an oversight perspective. If you're like managing a contract approval process or a vendor onboarding process, and you're using a few different applications for that, like Daniel mentioned, you mentioned a few like Jira, Asana, Slack, email, that's the sort of thing that happens naturally over time. Like your tech stack might, you know, evolve, and just you might start adding extra things to it. Or it could be the other side of the coin, like you mentioned there, Daniel, where people just use physical pieces of paper and email or like phone calls.
Yeah,
It's
like it gets the job done, right? Like it gets the
they
job done,
do.
but we
There are
have
a
a
lot.
slide on this, don't we? Do we have a slide to show some of this? Am
We
I
do.
jumping the gun there for you, James?
No, 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 no. I was going to call that out any second. I love this slide because it helps visualize, there's the point we're trying to make there, that if you don't have like a centralized tool, you could end up with a tech stack like this where each of these products individually, yeah, definitely does its job, but that oversight of a process and, the user experience will vary greatly. Like being able to see how many contracts are currently out for execution, how many contracts are we negotiating, how many people do we have to get back to. It's really difficult when you have to chase down emails and look in like 3 different applications for that. And it's not just useful for the process side. This was on one of your podcasts recently. It's useful from that audit trail perspective. If like in 2 years time you want to know who requested this supplier agreement and who approved it, who approved the budget, and who signed that MSA, if you have a tech stack like this slideshow we've got on the screen, it becomes really hard to dig into the past to see what happened. Whereas, and I think we have a following slide after this one, whereas if your tech stack, and this is an ideal scenario, obviously this is an ideal world where you do everything in Gatekeeper, but if you have a setup like this where all of these steps in an end-to-end process for getting a new contract approved, getting a vendor onboarded, if they all take place in the same system, finding historic information as well as current process information just becomes so much easier. You know exactly where to go. Yeah,
that's a good point, because like I did the audits pre-Gatekeeper via SharePoint, email, Slack, and spent weeks getting all the data together, and with Gatekeeper just showed the auditors on a Zoom call and they were largely happy with that. Still wanted me to screenshot a couple of bits because auditors love that, but yeah, it was much easier second time round.
Did you not invite your auditors into Gatekeeper? Give them like guest logins to show them the system?
Considered it, just like kind of worry that they're like snoop a little bit too much at times. That was all.
Yeah, fair.
We also have a poll. Just curious about our attendees today. What kind of how you're using Gatekeeper to automate your business processes. So just launching this poll here. We'll give it a couple minutes. And yeah, Daniel, feel free to tell us more about your experiences before joining Gatekeeper.
Yeah. This is I'm always interested to hear how people are using Gatekeeper, or just like what processes they have in the first place. But fundamentally, and I know I was chatting to you guys about this yesterday, like what are the problem areas with vendor and contract management? And it's typically vendor onboarding can be painful, especially when you're doing it through Excel spreadsheets and email. It takes a lot of time. So that's one major use case. Contract reviews was another one, and that was me selfishly saying that because I used to manage all of the new contracts with my just on my own with my legal team that I had to lean on. And then like there was just like one I just wanted to call out, and it's we call it file expiry workflow here, right? And that's a workflow or a process where we are chasing up all of that supporting documentation that you need to renew every year. So it could be insurance certificates, SOX certificates, it could be business continuity plans. James, you mentioned ESG early on, our new best practice workflow. I think that from a vendor management perspective, we're going to be getting a lot more ESG documentation. I know that some of our customers we already have are doing stuff around that, but the amount of evidence that we are collating from our vendors is only going up. So that workflow is great, right? Because it just notifies the vendor, they upload their documents through the vendor portal, and you don't have to do all of that chasing. And it will escalate it and like alert you if it's taken too long. But the team that I had in my last role, they would spend, before we had that, countless hours every single week chasing vendors for documentation. We used to have a whole part of our meetings, our weekly meetings dedicated to it, and just getting rid of that just freed them up. And like one of them said, I don't know what I'm going to do with my time now because I don't have to do that. It's like they just opened up a whole new world of like, oh, I can actually go and do really good, valuable like procurement, sourcing, vendor management work, which is great.
Just it's so obvious, right? Like if you went to an organization and said, well, we're going to go back to doing it the manual way, where you have to make note of all the documents you need to stay on top of and the vendors you're managing, and you have to chase them yourself. It'd just be a nightmare when you consider the alternative. But that's such a simple
Yeah.
workflow, that fire expiry one, but it's super useful for sure.
Yeah, I kind of think it's my favorite in a weird way. Just like it's so simple. It's just so brilliant.
I see that we have quite a few people who selected others. I'm just going to end the poll here. If you did put others, we're quite curious to see what other ways that you're using it aside from the ones on the screen. So feel free to share that via the chat there. Yeah, we have quite a few. I think the highest one result here is contract renewals and internal contract requests. Oh, and contract amendment requests.
That's great. Just looking here, we actually just got one question come in, which was, can you just discuss the touchless NDA feature? I appreciate that was on the poll there. Is it? And James, we might just need to get the CS team to double check on what versions of Gatekeeper you can use that on, but maybe you can talk to it. What is this workflow?
Yeah, so a touchless NDA workflow, and we'll get more into types of workflow and like the ways that they can be initiated and what they can do in a little bit later in this session. And obviously we'll explore some of these in more depth in later webinars too. But just as the elevator pitch of a touchless NDA workflow, it's one where via the link that you provide to your external parties that you want to get an NDA in place with, from that link, they can self-register their user account and their actual vendor record in your repository using a bit of our AI auto build solution that makes it a bit slicker from their user experience perspective. And they can preview your NDA terms directly in this external page, so they can confirm ahead of time that they're happy to get them signed, so that processes later on get move a lot quicker. And once they initiate that touchless form, Gatekeeper will generate that NDA draft from one of your pre-built templates for you. And depending on the scope of the workflow that you build out, touchless NDAs can vary slightly. You can either then conduct the negotiation cycle straight after having created the template, or you can just immediately send it back to that supplier to get signed, so that from that point on they're in your system and you can start doing more advanced things like proper onboarding them, or more advanced contracts that you need to get negotiated and executed there too. Is that sufficient, like just as a taster of what it does?
No, definitely. No, I really like it. I think we'll probably end up doing some sort of session around that. Like NDAs, typically high volume, problematic and annoying documents that most procurement, legal, contracting teams deal with. And this, for me, it's like a really easy way to get around a lot of the hassle around it, especially if you pair it with a standardized NDA template. Mm-hmm. And there's some in the UK and Europe and the US that are, I think, gaining traction there. I'm just looking here as well. Simon mentioned that they're using Gatekeeper for regulatory compliance, supply governance, process and materials. Jennifer mentioned SLA management, vendor compliance as well. So there's a lot you can do with these workflows. So it's interesting to see those. Mm.
Perfect. James, Daniel, are we ready to jump into workflows?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
perfect.
James can pull that up.
Yeah. So just everybody here, please keep in mind that some of the content covered today may be directed more towards our Gatekeeper admin users who are currently using workflows, or it might cover a view that you're not particularly familiar with. But if you're not currently a Gatekeeper admin or using workflows, we hope that some of the stuff that you see today will be useful in the future, or you'll start using it very soon. So James, for someone starting out using workflows, what should they even know before getting started?
Before getting started, right? I guess just to talk about what a workflow is in Gatekeeper terms, because workflow means different things to different people. So if I share my screen, because I've got some workflows ready-made to show that sort of exemplify the process. And in old webinars, we have talked about workflows and Kanban boards, and even in the Restore Visibility, they were hinted at from time to time, but it'd be good to just explain them. So to Gatekeeper, a workflow is a Kanban board like this. And if you aren't familiar with the term Kanban, it's just a project management term for a particular methodology. So you might not know what Gantt charts are. You might prefer to-do lists, but Kanban board is a really good way of structuring and organizing a process. So the key elements that you have are the board itself.
James, just quickly, your Zoom is coming through on your share screen just a little bit on mine. I just wanted to, just on the right side, it's gone away now by the looks of things. No worries. I don't want to there was no easy way to interrupt you there, but maybe
That's fine.
start again
Thanks for
on
letting me
the
know.
Kanban. No worries.
That's fine. Right. So we've got our Kanban board up. Hopefully, like, wasn't too
All good.
obscured.
All good.
So this is what could be considered like a proto Kanban board. Like the original version of a Kanban board would be basically a board containing 3 columns in its original format. You would have the to-do column, which in this case would be a contract being requested. You would have the doing, like the in progress column, so a contract in this case may be being negotiated and executed. Then you would have the final column, which is done, which is those contracts that where all the tasks have been completed. And this, you know, we don't have, I don't think, any clients that use workflows in this simplistic in nature, because what you can do from the next element of Kanban boards is actually take those columns, or as we call them, phases, and not just make them to-do piles, but actually configure them to represent the actual stages of a process. So on this board that I've just opened up here, this one has phases that have been named after specific steps of in this case, a simple contract negotiation and execution workflow. And each step will represent a point in the process of getting a contract executed that will have cards move through it as they complete the various tasks. And one of the key elements that I'll just call out here before we deep dive into some of the more advanced stuff is that on each of these phases that represent a task, Gatekeeper will not just facilitate the actual task itself, like contract negotiation, contract approval, but also delegate the responsibility to the relevant party. So who is it from our organization that needs to be negotiating contracts once they're ready to do that? Well, there's mandatory fields that I didn't realize I'd put here, but let's say this contract had been requested and moved over to the next stage of the workflow board. Who would be responsible for getting that contract negotiated? Gatekeeper would assign the relevant individual or team or teams, depending on the scope of your workflow, to complete that task. I guess we should talk really about what a card is as well, because we've talked about the board that obviously represents the process and these phases that represent steps of a process. A card is a key part of that as well, because that's the actual contract or supplier or any object or record that's moving through the process, completing the steps as it goes. And I'll open up a different board for this one because we've got a more complex one over here that has a bit more information on these card levels. So like I said, a card is, it is what it is. It's something that represents the contract or the vendor moving through the process. And as it goes through, it will collect metadata. People will be reviewing it. There'll be documents and negotiations, approvals, signatures taking place. And so whilst you're on a Kanban board, this is nice. This is that nice restore visibility bit, Daniel, that you mentioned, having oversight of processes. You can easily see by looking at a card, first off, what phase is it on? So what has it gone through to get to that point? By the phase it's on, you can also see what is it currently doing. And there's a few other bits that you can glance at the card level to see what's happening right now. What's the current status of this? I guess I'll quickly cover these off. I don't want to linger too long.
No, I think it's good to
high level stuff.
For example, James, like when I look at this, I'm like, oh, there's like a little contract file, like icon on that. Like, is that to signify there's like a contract in the card, right?
Exactly. So this is the same icon. Some people might have connected these dots. If I look in my left-hand menu, this contract repository, this is the same icon, and that lets me know that there is a contract metadata record that is linked to this card. And the way that that's probably happened is because this is an internal contract request workflow, it's probably been created via this workflow process, and now the card being at this stage, it's out for e-sign because of, as we can see it is here, there should be a contract record there. And this actually functionally does something. So it's the case that it's not just an icon to let you know that there's a contract linked to this particular card. I can actually click this to take myself through to the contracts repository to actually open up that record instantly. In case, you know, that's just one of those tips for quickly navigating around Gatekeeper, I guess.
It's a good one. It's a really good one. Like rather than click, like saving seconds. All four. What's the just on the card though? Like is that Lucy there? Lucy, is that you on that card?
Yep.
That is Lucy.
Okay.
She is a user in this environment. So on the left hand side of cards, what you'll get is an indication of who's responsible for that task at that particular time. And like I mentioned when we were on the previous board, phases can be configured to automatically assign either individuals who are the relevant stakeholders for performing a certain action. So in this one, Lucy will have been the one to send out this statement of work for e-sign, or teams. So in this card over here, this has been assigned to the legal team to do that, maybe because Lucy wasn't the appropriate person to be managing the signature on this phase. And these let you know who currently owns that card. And as a workflow admin feature, so for our workflow admins that are attending this, clicking these icons can allow you to either change or assign new owners like instantly. So I did talk about the fact that Gatekeeper will generally be configured to automatically assign owners. That's one of the really nice ways that it streamlines processes and removes manual admin work. Just when a card arrives at a particular phase, check who should be doing that task and assign them as the owner and notify them. But from time to time, you might want extra users to come in and take over, or lend an extra pair of eyes, and you can do that instantly by clicking that icon and then assigning like an extra team, an extra user, or extra groups.
This is just good, like a really good one if someone's suddenly out sick and you can't plan for that. You can't delegate beforehand the workflow delegation. Someone can just go in, change it. James, the numbers, I'm looking at 47 days there. Can we just go through those?
I guess not all workflows will have 3. These are timers, and not all workflow cards will have 3 here, but I'll just cover the first 2 that will always be in place. 1 will show you how long a card has been on the workflow. So in this case, if this is an internal contract request workflow, it will tell you when the request came in. So as we can see, this one came in on the 11th of May, so it's been here 47 days. And the next one will tell you how long it's been at the current phase. So that gives you that at a glance indication as how long is this contract approval process been running for this particular card, and how long has it been with Lucy to get it signed. So you can see both the end-to-end time and the current, like how long is this current process taking. The third timer here is an extra feature that we definitely recommend a lot of our clients should be configuring for their phase by phase rules. And we call it an SLA timer, but it's essentially like a countdown timer to give a deadline for a particular task to be performed. And the way that these work is when you set them for a particular phase. So let's say you think e-signatures should be taking 7 days to get done and dusted. When a card lands at that phase, the countdown timer starts counting down from that 7 days. As we can see, this one's deadline is the 5th of July, so it's got 6 and a bit days to go. And when that expires, one of 2 things can happen. One is that if you don't configure anything to happen, cards will get highlighted red, as you can see here, and that lets you know if you are overseeing a process that they're basically screaming at you to say this is past what the deadline you think it should be set, to go. What you can also do is, and some of our clients do this, you can configure Gatekeeper to sort of automatically escalate that. So in some cases, you might want to say, especially for like time-sensitive workflows, like I think, Daniel, did you say a lot of people mentioned that contract renewal reviews are one of their top workflow processes? They're definitely time-sensitive if like end dates or notice termination.
You definitely want an escalation phase.
Yeah, you don't want cards to sit for, as you can see, this one's 41 days over its SLA deadline. You don't want that to happen on time-sensitive processes. So you can tell Gatekeeper when this timer passes its SLA deadline, move it somewhere else, like give it to a line manager to review, or pass it to the legal team and say we need to serve notice ASAP, or anything really that fits the way that your organization manages its contracts and vendors.
Mm-hmm. James, we actually have a question here from Raj. If I have an external step that needs to be completed as part of the workflow, such as a security assessment, can that step be included in this Kanban board?
That is a good question. So it depends the level of inclusion that they want. So we do definitely have some scope for facilitating external processes. This template workflow, for instance, this internal contract request one, has a phase dedicated for something taking place outside the workflow. So you can see there are 2 e-sign phases on this board, one where that's taking place in Gatekeeper, in this case via our DocuSign integration. But we do have clients that say we want this to happen outside Gatekeeper because maybe our vendor wants to use their e-sign solution, or we need to print it off and sign it physically because that's just how we do things from time to time. So that's the simple way of doing it. You could have a phase that represents that assessment being taken out of Gatekeeper, and you still leverage the element of Gatekeeper notifying maybe your security assessment team that they need to go and do that and then bring the results back to store them in the system once it's done. But there's also what some of our clients do from time to time is leverage, clever integrations either via Zapier or the Open API to flag that certain contracts or vendors need to have something pushed to an external system. And that's definitely something you can facilitate via Gatekeeper and auto actions as well. But that's very advanced for like what we're talking about in the 101 session. Maybe we can pick that up in some of the advanced webinar sessions, or answer that in a bit more detail in this knowledge base webinar recording.
Cool. James, I'm just looking here, just on the cards, the final bit really. Yep. The M, the B and the B that we can see. I know I do think we covered this last time round, but I appreciate not everyone was here when we were covering custom data when we dipped into the workflows for the first time.
Yeah, well, I'll cover this banner bit as well because I think that's quite cool.
Yeah.
But
Oh
the B
yeah,
and the
yeah, I
B,
forgot about that.
the B and the B relate to the vendor that is also associated with this contract record. So it's the case that in this particular Gatekeeper environment, I've enabled our Market IQ suite, so Market IQ Finance, which is our credit safe integration, and Market IQ Cyber, which is our security scorecard integration. And what they allow me to do is via, and you can see this on the workflow card level, when you connect vendors to them in your repository, and you can do it on workflows as well, get an at-a-glance indication basically of the risk level of the financial standing and the cybersecurity standing of that particular vendor that we're signing the contract with. And it's especially handy for vendor onboarding workflows, but it's a nice value add in these contract ones as well, because from an oversight perspective, I can see how healthy or low risk that relationship's going to be by those indications there. And if I hover over them, I can see cyber rating 82, financial rating is low risk. So that's basically what they give you once you have a vendor that's connected to those modules. And then this bit here,
I was just going to add, like you made a really good point, right? Like these may come from like a vendor onboarding process, but they are useful here. And a lot of the time when you think about it, the contract team may very well be different to the vendor management, the procurement, whatever you're called when you deal with your vendors or suppliers within your business. There's so many names now. But legal, contracts, contract management, they want to know like what is the risk profile of this vendor, especially around like cyber and financial stability, because you can then change the clauses in the contract. So it like really helps like get your mind ready for what you need to red line.
Exactly. It's not just having the data there, it's using it. I think you spoke with this on your Tom Rogers episode of your podcast, didn't you, around being smart with the data that you have, so you can be monitoring vendors that they're upholding the clauses that you've built in, and also knowing what clauses you need to be adding to your agreements and what checks you need to have there. So yeah, that's definitely a good point to raise, that that's not just a vendor management due diligence thing. It can carry over to other areas of the system. So this very much contract focused, legal maybe focused process is still getting that information, even though they aren't necessarily the ones performing the due diligence checks.
Yeah, definitely.
And this final bit I just want to quickly highlight, because I don't want to spend too long on the card level either. It's just a banner that gives a bit more information around a very specific process. So this could have also been a waiting Gatekeeper e-sign banner, because both of them work in workflows, but it's the case that if you are including a signature process in your Gatekeeper workflows, you get a nice banner here indicating how far that is through the process as well. So this would be, if this was over on a done column, it would say, DocuSign completed, and it'd be a nice green banner to let us know what's happened there. But this just lets you know what the card is waiting on when it's sat in this e-sign phase, that it hasn't just been sat there and ignored by Lucy for however long it's been there. We know that she has sent this out for 47 days, but she has sent it out, and it's just awaiting signatures. So this is a nice status banner that's just a bit added on to workflow cards.
Yeah, that's great. We have got a question that's just come in around Market IQ Cyber. I'm just going to propose we hold that to the end for that question. We'll come back to the end. Just whilst we're in the flow, just on these workflow cards, we can jump in a little bit more, and we'll circle back to that, Simon, at the end for you.
Okay, cool. All right, so that's the high level bits of a workflow, like the key building blocks to start with when you're considering a process. The process end to end, the phases that represent all of the different steps that you need to build into it, and then the considerations around cards moving through it. Basically, they're the component parts. There are some extra bits, obviously we want to quickly cover them off, that make up a workflow, and for that I'll jump back to this workflow 2 to talk about let me just move this one back here to talk about the first value add bit. In my opinion, this is the best why, like the best selling point of workflows, and it's the form. So opening up a card here, you can see I've got like 2 form sections, and basically this is one of the key elements of what workflows give you in terms of that control pillar that we talked about right at the top of the call. So and let me just click out of the card to sort of hover over a few other areas of the system. So we've talked about restore visibility, and whether it's Gatekeeper that you've done this in or another contract management solution, if there is an element of work that goes into making sure that your contracts and vendor repository has all the documents, the data and the custom fields are all fleshed out how you want them, everything's organized with the appropriate stakeholders compiled. One thing that you wouldn't want after doing all the work to get all your central source of truth representing the truth is that any user in the system can just start going to your repository and adding data and adding documents and editing things willy-nilly. What workflows give you via forms like this is the ability to have users collaborate and make sure that cards go through an appropriate process, making sure the right people are checking over the data, the right people are approving it, all the appropriate documentation that complements it is being compiled before it makes its way into your repository. And obviously I say make its way in like it's a new record, but the other side of the coin is, and a lot of people here mentioned that they use contract renewal workflows, is that they also help maintain that data as well. So if you do have your contract end dates and your contract termination dates captured in your repository, you'll want that to be maintained so that, you know, in a year's time, after doing all that work to update your repository, they aren't all just showing as overdue. You want a process to make sure that the appropriate stakeholders are viewing the form data, updating it to represent the accurate and the current state of affairs. And that's what workflow forms allow you to do. And Daniel, you're really hot on this one because this one was a big one for you. There's some other value adds outside of that oversight perspective and control of the repository that workflow forms allow you to do. So for instance, if I was requesting a new contract on this workflow with Atlassian, this was a bad example because Atlassian doesn't have any data. Never works when you want it to, does it? But if I was requesting a new contract with Atlassian, it was because it was an existing card and the data had already been saved and moved around. You can see because this vendor has previously already been onboarded and we've collected things like their registered address, their legal trading name, things like that. An end user wouldn't have to spend so long on data entry each time, which definitely for you know, particular users might be one of those barriers to, you know, engaging with a system. If it's just a lot of extra work each time, like filling out the vendor name, filling out relatively basic information that for the most part you might already have, forms can allow you to streamline a bit of that. So in this case, you can say it's Atlassian, then they come down to the fill out details around their contract. Atlassian's already there. Some of the fields we can already like hard code to say that like end users shouldn't have to be thinking about what status and approval rating a contract is being given at the outset. They just have to fill in the bits that are relevant to that specific agreement before they kick off a process.
Yeah, it's a good one, right? Because I know we were talking about this yesterday. As like whenever I got a contract request in, like I instantly want to have all the vendor information there, mainly because I'll have to put a load of that information into the contract for one.
Yeah.
And I know we're not going to talk about it. We could use Gatekeeper to help like populate templates and things like that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves there. But like it's just a really easy way for me to then like deal with that, and a lot of the legal people that are probably on this call and elsewhere, like that's probably what they're using it for. And like just to depending on how you work, whether you're like quite sequential or maybe working a bit more agile, I want to figure out like whereabouts in the like the vendor onboarding or due diligence phase is that vendor at. So when a request comes in and I've got that information there, I can just quickly click through and double check in seconds. It's super useful just to tie workflows together in that way as well.
That's a really good point, and that is quite an advanced one to just drop in on this 101 session, but it's definitely because I've been using the term like end-to-end process that, you know, encompasses say this contract request workflow, but we definitely do have clients that whilst they're getting the contract negotiated will probably be getting the vendor onboarded separately, like completing due diligence assessments. And you spoke about this, I'm dropping your podcast in again, but you spoke about this on your Datadog podcast episode where that head of supply management,
Michelle.
Yeah, where she talked about the fact that she always had legal be checking the contract over whilst they were doing due diligence assessments, just because it shortens that time to value for end users, so they can see lots of processes being done in tandem in their software solutions, and it gets that extra buy-in from users when they see everything's running smoothly. Things can be running parallel are. So yeah, we've only really looked at individual Kanban boards so far, but yeah, you definitely can run processes in parallel if that's something you want to consider. Cool. So on to the next bit. So we talked about forms, and that's one of the key bits for me, that the basic bit of control that it gives you, that if someone wants to add a new contract to the repository or get a new vendor relationship in place, they can't just go to the repository and add it. They have to request it, and it has to go through the steps that you as a workflow admin have decided are the appropriate points before a contract can be classed as live and approved and executed. And you can build into that the next bit that I want to talk about, various tasks. So task is a fairly generic term, and it's just one, and it's intentionally generic because it contains a few different types of thing that you can build into your workflow. Basically, what that encompasses are anything that actually is facilitated by a process that takes place on one of these phases. And by that, what I mean is a task could be something as simple as someone else updating the form data. So like we talked about, you don't want to make your end users always fill out every single piece of data that you got in there. Sometimes you might want to hide things from them to avoid clutter in the form because they might not know the answers to it yet. Or sometimes you want other people like supplier relationship managers to be filling information, maybe around supply classifications and risk assessments and so on. So the most basic task maybe you could have in a workflow is just someone else updating the form, collaborating and iteratively building out the data that's going to make it into your repository. Another task could be something like an approval. So we can see on this workflow here, basically the way this one will work is once a user requests a contract, that can be assigned to a particular team or a line manager or something like that to say, of the data that's been submitted and the actual nature of the request, I'm happy for this to proceed and provide that approval so that the card can progress. And then other tasks are generally quite really useful ones that actually are part of the contract and vendor management life cycle. So there are ones that are fairly basic, like creating contract metadata records or creating vendor metadata records or updating them as well. So taking the data that's been added to the form and then built up in the form and turning that from just a form record into an actual record in the repository that represents a real agreement, a real vendor. And then there's extra things as well. So we looked at, actually, let me scoot across. We looked at actions like sending contracts out for signature, DocuSign, or Gatekeeper e-sign. They're the big ones. But you've also got other bits. And Daniel, you just mentioned a second ago, where you can embed in workflows parts of the actual contract negotiation cycle. You can have Gatekeeper generate draft documents, plugging in contract and vendor data in there just to save that bit of time if you are using contract templates. And you can have Gatekeeper facilitate the draft versioning and redlining as well. So via what we call e-negotiate. Yeah, it definitely is.
No one wants to waste time like in the file name, like version 1.1000 version, clean. Yeah. Like I spent way too much of my career just doing that. Yeah. Like the double final one. So yeah, you can literally just call these documents whatever you want, and it deals with version control. Is a great one. And like just James, I was just going to add like something I found really useful was just like converting documents from like Word to PDF, which is great. Like you don't have to worry about doing stuff like that yourself. Creating contract templates is a really good one. And I know you mentioned it straight away, like creating the records sounds like such a minor thing, but like before you go into before you bring a platform in, like how are you doing that? Normally you typically will have some sort of tracker, maybe a SharePoint site that has stuff, but you don't actually like have this like tangible record. You have stuff that belongs to a record in multiple places, kind of how we showed with that one slide near the start. So yeah, big fan of tasks within Gatekeeper, or actions as we call them here.
Yeah. And then I guess the final piece, since we're talking about actions, is what ties the whole Gatekeeper like workflow Kanban methodology together, and that's what we call transitions. And this one again sounds super simple, but it's so powerful when you think about it. And let me jump back to that really like prototype workflow to show you like the opposite of what having transitions in place does. If you have a Kanban board where you have phase representing your processes or your statuses of cards, the old school way of using these would be like when it's ready to be done, you drag it over and move it to where it is, or like what the current status is. The way that Gatekeeper workflows function is all that users need to be aware of is what they have to do. And by completing that action, Gatekeeper will route the card to where it needs to go. So for instance, if these final approvals are collected against this event services agreement, no one has to then come in and drag the card over to the e-sign stage. The collection of those approvals will mean that Gatekeeper automatically routes it to where it needs to go. And that's just one of those really nice points that means that, it is streamlining your processes, because you don't need to worry about like, oh, this one's in this phase, but I know this person completed their task, so I can drag it over. It's just you configure your phases, you configure what needs to be done there. And when people do their tasks, cards will move through on their own, starting on the left-hand side where they begin the process, collecting their data, collecting their documents and completing their approvals and other tasks until they end up on one of the the done phases that you configure for your workflow. And in this template, we have a done rejected where things don't go so well and like contract negotiations break down. But, you know, ideally your workflow should be ending with things, a contract's been executed, the vendor's been onboarded, things like that. So that's the key bit that ties it all together. You have all those component parts of what your users see and what they do, but Gatekeeper handles moving cards through the process as people complete their tasks.
Yeah, James, like I know, like I appreciate we're keeping it simple. And I'm just gonna add like just a little sprinkling on top. Like just I know like a bunch of people on this call will probably have like, oh, for like certain vendor types, perhaps a different team or different set of people view them, or like different contract types. Like maybe someone dealt with within procurement and some go to legal, and you can really set it up so like depending on the contract type or vendor type, it can go to like those different people on different phases. As well, like you can break it out and really customize it however you need to. So it's just, I love transitions. Yeah. Like there's nothing worse than like having someone within your team have to like manually force the process along. And like, I know we haven't spoken about it in this session, but like we can set up like notifications that get sent out or emails, and like you can really get these actions and tasks that we have with transitions to get your vendors or stakeholders doing stuff for you without you having to write another email, craft another message. We can like put some automation around that to speed things up.
Yeah, that's a good point on the different transitions, sending things to different teams and so on. Because was it you that taught me the term de minimis? There was a workflow I was building where basically, yeah, that sort of thing came up where, and it's very common for workflows to have different transitions that fire depending on the scope of the contract or the risk of the vendor, things like that. And a lot of our clients do build that in. So de minimis was one that just sprang to mind because I thought you were the one that taught me that word. But basically, we had it wasn't you then, Daniel, but I had one client that built a workflow where if the value was low enough and if it was with a pre-approved vendor and like if it met certain, you know, risks, you know, if it was under certain the risk thresholds, it could skip a few of the approval and negotiation steps because they didn't want to waste their time on it, basically was the reasoning behind it. But you can build different pathways through the same process to essentially fast track particular cards, or, you know, slow, what's the opposite of fast track, or take them through the long route like you've highlighted if they need extra
proportionality, right? Like it's proportional to like the risk, the value, whatever, however you risk rate or rate your vendors, the contracts, you can just you can build it out in that manner, which is great. Awesome. Is that everything that we were going to cover?
That's for the 101.
Yeah, for the basics, just to stop you guys before you start nerding out too hard in all the advanced functionalities. But yes, just so that way we keep everything very simple for the 101 for today. But we will go more into detail on other features and functionalities of workflows. So everyone who's attending, don't worry, we will go into more details for those. If we do have any other additional questions, please feel free to send them in now. We do have one last poll here just to see what everyone is interested in for our future workflow related webinars. So we will have a couple more in the future. So feel free to kind of just tick whichever ones interest you. And we'll wait for some questions that comes in as well.
Yeah, I know we kind of don't know how long this control series will last, and just to be completely open about that, because there's probably, depending on how much we decide to show like in these sessions, it could go on for quite a while. And I kind of have the conservative estimate that we could be doing this for 12 months, this series. But let's just see. I think if we really want to jump into it, we could show you some really cool stuff to really optimize your workflows, and then get you just doing this yourselves. And effectively, like how I see it is like, if everyone that's on these calls can become effectively like an admin user, they're super confident using Gatekeeper. Like it just makes your life easier just to make those ad hoc changes or just try stuff out. Like I used to just try stuff out, break stuff, probably break stuff a lot whilst you're playing around with it, and just see like how can we eke out like any improvements. So it's a good thing to learn for sure.
Well, let me end this poll here. It seems like we have a couple of results there. I'll share the results for everyone.
Oh, that's cool. It's cool to
Workflow
see.
actions, best practice workflows.
Approvals as well has a lot here, and I feel like that's a really solid one, right? Like when we think about like the three pillars, what's the final one is safeguard compliance, showing that you have a really solid review and approval process built into everything you do. It's a really good way to, especially if you get audited, to show like we're actually doing stuff, we're following what we said we would do in these policies or to you in our last audit. It's a really easy way to prove it, especially with our lifecycle views within Gatekeeper on the vendor and contract records. So yeah, that's cool to see. We can definitely cover all of this for sure. Lucy, I was just going to say, like, we did just have a question come in, and I can just direct this at yourself, James. So I don't know who this is. This one's anonymous, but it's the question is: I primarily need to build a workflow to send out a new agreement to all my vendors to be docu-signed. So that was the question, and my original thoughts were, well, like the contract, sort of, almost like the workflow you were just showing is ideal, but like just thinking a bit wider than that, like we've got the best practice contract review signature workflow. That could be a good one that you can get set up fairly quickly on that. But
the word that stands out there is all. So like
all
my
I don't know how
vendors,
many they
like,
have.
Yeah, imagine if there's like 1,000. Like if you, to be fair, you know, there are ways you can do things like that in bulk, but if it was, let's say 1,000 vendors, you wouldn't want to be reviewing or having someone like a human check
Manually
each one
do
of
that.
those and approve it. But because of like the bit that we mentioned around touchless, and you know, you've hinted at this a couple of times, I can tell you want to show it, Daniel, but because of the way that contract templates and the publishing, like i.e. converting of those templates from Word to PDF and then sending them out for e-sign can all be automated, it is definitely possible to send an agreement out to all vendors. I think I did have a client do this once. They needed a new DPA because they were changing regions that they operated from.
Yeah. It's 1,000, by the way. It's over 1,000. Like I'm just going to say, like, get in contact with your your customer success manager after this call as well, like so we can help you with this, because we can definitely make this possible and really help you out with this. Yeah, like your point now, like, oh, suddenly we change region, or we like change data center, or we like a new piece of regulation comes in. Like these are like the really problematic things that any procurement or contract manager doesn't want to see, because you suddenly have to drop everything to get these going. But yeah, we can certainly get this sorted. But yeah, I really like your point of like templates, having the touchless setup could be a really really easy way to almost pre-build the capability.
All of it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
We have another one in from Paula. If a phase in a workflow gets rejected for missing critical information, can the owner go back in and update the card? I had a user mention that the fields have a lock icon next to them.
Yeah, they can. So that workflow that I was sharing before, for the people that like been were eagle-eyed might have spotted it, that the contract request workflow had an element built into it that was called, there was a phase called review rejection, where if something was wrong with a submission, or you know, clarity was needed, a card could be sent back and reassigned to the owner to say try again. If the field that Paula is highlighting is showing a locked icon, it could just speak to that phase not being configured properly in the form tab. That's another one that, yeah, reach out to your CSM to go through it with you, because it sounds like in that particular phase, the way the form has been configured there, it might have been set to read only rather than editable. So you might want to just retool that depending on what you want to give to that user who's accessing it again.
I had that happen to me. Like when I first dealt with, like, someone pressed reject, it came back and we just didn't have the settings again for when that happened. So yeah, quite an easy fix, thankfully.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm just seeing, Lucy, were there any other questions that we had there?
Oh, another one came in. May all admin move cards to the end of the workflow? I've been able to, but others have not. And this came in from Brenda.
They all should, if you're a workflow admin, yeah. So I guess admin can mean different things depending on where you're an admin in Gatekeeper. If you're a workflow admin, yes, you can move cards. If you're just an admin in
James,
the repository side.
Could you show the user settings just to show which one in the user settings needs to be checked off to enable the, because
sure.
you can be an admin without being a workflow admin.
Exactly. So when the initial setting of setting up a user, you have whether they are an admin or a collaborator role. So ignore these bits for now. And that pertains to what they can do in the repository. And when they're looking at records, can they add, can they edit, can they delete? However, there's additional permissions down here, and this is specifically workflow admins. Can they build workflows? Can they edit them? And can they move cards around the workflow board using that control function? So it might be that the person who asked this question can do that because they have this permission. Their colleagues can't because they need to be given this. Obviously, you have to have that decision of like, should they be given this? But that's the permission you need to be able to move cards around the board.
Fortunately, it's all tracked regardless. So if you do give it to someone and they move it, like it's going to show up on their Lifecycle tab of that card. So hopefully alleviate any trust concerns there.
Yeah.
Awesome. James, one just came in from Simon. Do you have a video walkthrough of how to set up a workflow and take it through to completion? Examples could be NDA and contract. I know you've been working on a bunch of walkthroughs.
How to set? Yeah, so I guess we do have these for the best practice templates for sure. So the touchless NDA, for instance, if you did want to use that touchless form that allows external parties to preview the terms and self-register, taking some of that data admin work off your hands, that has a knowledge base guide, and you can get to that from just going to the knowledge base and
can you show it again?
Okay, yeah.
show it like just like I know people are super visual, like to go through to the workflow area is a good way to show this one.
So if you're a workflow administrator, when you go add, you can either build your workflow Kanban board from scratch just using workflow, or if you go workflow template, this is where our best practice templates library is. And touchless NDA is down here in the bottom right. But what this also has is, first off, you can create the template, but hitting setup guide will take you through to the knowledge base article that has some explanation as to what the workflow does. It will also, they'll also have, in some cases, like a walkthrough of the user experience. And they also have configuration steps, like how to add this to your Gatekeeper environment, how to configure the necessary steps to fill in the gaps. So basically this one will say, this is how you need to add your contract template because we can't build your NDA template for you, things like that. So yeah, we have knowledge base guides for some of these based on the template you want to use. And there are obviously other knowledge base articles that cover off some of the 101 bits we talked about today, like phases and form access and building workflow forms, things like that.
Yeah, I just think that if you're thinking about setting up a new process, and the best practice workflows are a really good way to get started, even if they're going to slightly differ from perhaps how you're doing things now. Like you can see the process maps that we've built and what we've based it on within these setup guides in the knowledge base, and you can just there's steps further on in those guides to show you, like maybe you need to add a different review phase, or maybe you get rid of a phase and add one of your own, and it shows you how to tie the transitions together. So yeah, hopefully that will be helpful for you there, Simon.
And one more from Michelle. If the Lifecycle avatars don't have a name when you hover over them, is that an AI within Gatekeeper?
Is this as in on the, is this on the cards? That's the only.
Yeah. Is this a workflow?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So as in, yeah, let's get one up, and I'm sure Michelle might comment as we're doing this.
So I assume, does she mean the life cycle here? If it doesn't have an avatar, does she mean the history or the life cycle? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's the contract. James, on the workflow card, some of them don't have a avatar. It's normally because they're assigned to a team or not assigned, right? So if we go to workflows on the Kanban, right? Yeah.
So yeah, exactly.
So
so if Lucy hadn't been assigned to this card, you would get like an empty set icon that shows that no one's assigned, but you can also get this generic picture that shows that it could be a team, it could be multiple teams. It's not just one individual.
It's only a person where it's one individual person that is being either pre-assigned to, or now, like if you went back to the Q3 project delivery one that Lucy was just on, assign Lucy or someone else to, it would show their face.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you have lots of teams as opposed to individuals, yeah, absolutely. And I almost feel like that's probably like the majority here will probably just have it route to a team, and then you'll assign it whoever's leading that team will assign it to whoever is best placed for it. So that's fairly common there for sure.
All right, perfect. I think that's all the time that we have for today. But if anybody has any other questions, feel free to email or reach out to your CSM. They'll be able to answer any questions. And we will be having our next workflow webinar next month. We'll send out email communications and everything for that. But thank you so much, James and Daniel. And we'll see you guys all next month.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming on and listening to James and I nerd out about workflows for a little bit. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.